Now I know it's been a little while since we've done a video, but we have a lot of material to cover in the next few weeks, and I feel like this is going to be our fastest way to get through it. Today we're talking about converting percents, decimals, and fractions, different rational numbers from one form to another. So we want to go from a percent to a fraction, from a fraction to a decimal, from a decimal to a percent, and be able to go the other way around. And you've done this before. Your calculator will do it for you. I'll show you how to do it on the calculator and how to do it by hand, because sometimes going by hand is actually faster than taking the time to plug it in your calculator. But from your vocabulary list, remember that percent, if I were to say something like 57%, that means 57 per 100. That's actually a ratio. That's saying that we have 57 out of every 100, and that per is our fraction bar. Okay, so down here when I start with a percent, let's say we have 72%, and I want to change that to a fraction, then what I need to do is rewrite it as a fraction, and I do that by really just reading it. I read 72%, which means 72 per 100. So here in this arrow, I'm going to write read it and write over 100. So 72% looks like 72 over 100. So I'm going to write that as 72 over 100. Now the only thing we don't like about that number is that we can simplify. We don't want it to be 72 over 100 when we write it as a fraction. We want it in simplest form. So on my calculator, I'm going to put 72 over 100, and when I hit enter, it's going to simplify that for me. And I should get a nice number, 18 over 25. So 72 over 100 becomes 18 over 25. So to go from a percent to a fraction, we just read it. Whatever's in front of the percent sign goes on top. Whatever's over 100. Sorry, so if I were to have something like, let's say 57.3%, I would write 57.3 over 100. So converting that, it would become 57.3 over 100. And because of that decimal, if we type it in our calculator, 57.3 over 100, it doesn't like having a decimal on top, so it's actually going to get rid of it and change it to a decimal form, but we don't want decimal form, we want fraction form. So that one becomes 573 over 1,000. That's how we would write 57.3%, either as 573 over 1,000 or 57.3 over 100. Either one's okay with me. I like it being over 100 right here because it's per 100, and this one says 573 per 1,000. I don't like that as much as per 100. So now we need to go from a fraction to a decimal. So we're going to take these same numbers that we had before, and now we're going to turn them into decimals. And the way that we do that is just by dividing. We just divide the numerator by the denominator, or we use our best friend button. So we divide the numerator by the denominator, or we use our best friend button. So I need to write, let's take this 72 over 100, 72 over 100, and I can hit my best friend button, and I want to turn that into a decimal. So that becomes 0.72. Oops, we put our point in a funny spot. That becomes 0.72. And what's cool about this is if I use 18 over 25, I'm going to get the same decimal. Because really, 18 over 25 is the same number as 72 over 100. So if I write 18 over 25, and I hit my best friend button again, it's going to say 0.72. If I say 18 divided by 25, 0.72. If I say 72 divided by 100, 0.72. It's going to keep giving me the same answer over and over again. Okay. Now, going from a decimal to a percent, we want to be able to go from our decimal form to our percent form. We'll take this decimal right here, 0.72, and I say 0.72, and there's two ways to do this. One on the calculator, right here next to the percent button, I have a change to percent. So if I do second and the right parenthesis, it says 0.72, change it to a percent, and when I hit enter, it tells me 72%, which is what I wanted to get to. So we can either use the change to percent button, or a faster way is just to move the decimal. We can move the decimal 2 places to the right. So 0.72 is 0.72, and if I move it 1, 2 to here, that becomes 72, and I just put the percent sign after it. 0.72 becomes 72%. Now I can also go backwards. I can go from a percent, and instead of following the arrows, I can go backwards. I can change a percent to a decimal. To go this direction, I move to the right. So to go from a percent to a decimal, if I wanted to go this direction, I would move the decimal 2 to the left. Okay? Or on my calculator, I can type in 72%. And if I hit my best friend button, it's going to change it to a fraction, but it's also going to change it. Oh, if I hit my best friend button again, it'll change it to a decimal. So that's kind of a way to bypass that, so it becomes 0.72. To go from a decimal to a fraction, to go from here to here, I use my best friend button. I just use my best friend button. So I type in 0.72, best friend button, tells me 18 over 25, which gets me right to here. And then to go from a fraction to a percent, I can do the same thing. I can go from a fraction to a percent by using the change to percent button. So if I want 18 over 25 and I want to change that to a percent, I use the change percent button right here, 72%, and I'm done. Okay, so I know that's a review. It goes pretty quick, so we're going to try that down here at the bottom. I have a decimal, 0.02. I want to change that to a percent. So I'm going to move the decimal 1, 2 to the right, and that tells me a 2, and that I add the percent sign, 2%. If I want to go from a decimal to a fraction, I'm going to take a shortcut, 0.02, that's my decimal, best friend button, and it tells me that's 1 out of 50. Whoops, excuse me. So that's 1 out of 50 as a fraction. Now coming down to 43.7%, I want to change that to a decimal, so I'm just going to take the shortcut and move my decimal point 2 to the left. So that becomes 0.437. And now I want to change that decimal to a fraction. So 0.437, best friend button, hit enter, and it tells me 437 over 1,000. So 437 over 1,000. Moving on to 1.4 as a decimal. If I want to change it to a percent, let's use the calculator this time, 1.4, and I want to change that, change to percent button, and I hit enter, and it says 140%, which makes sense because 1 is 100%, and we've got more than 1. We have 1.4, so that's 140%. Now I want to go from 1.4 to a fraction, so 1.4, best friend button, and it tells me that that is 7 over 5, and it even simplifies it for me, so 7/5. Now we're going to go from 2 3/10, and we're going to change it to a decimal and a percent, so I'm going to put in 2 3/10, best friend button, and it tells me that that becomes 2.3 as a decimal. And now I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to make it a percent. So I'm going to move it 1, 2, which makes a 0 right here, and I have 230%. Or I could have done 2.3, change it to a percent, 230%. And that's all we're doing. Now I know I went quick. This is a review. It's the calculator doing most of the work. So on your own, go ahead and give these problems a try over here on the right. Double check your conversions. You can do it in your head. You can do it by hand. You can also use your calculator. Whatever's easiest for you. But get this table filled out. Bring it up to me. I'll check your work and you can move forward.